For more on Israel's latest actions in Rafah, we're joined by Avi Melamed. He's a former Israeli intelligence officer and former senior official on Arab affairs. Thank you for your time, Avi. Israel says the ordinance they launched on Sunday couldn't have caused the damage that was caused. Talk about that.
Yes, well, the whole ins and outs of this incident are not very clear. There are different versions about it, including a Palestinian one that actually argued that apparently what happened was that Hamas was deposing some vehicle loaded with ammunitions right in the vicinity of this area where allegedly or apparently civilians were hit. So I think that as of now, it will be difficult to decisively decide what exactly happened there. But I think that according to the recent US administration announcement, also based upon the Israeli report, it's unlikely that it was an Israeli major use of weapons that resulted that catastrophic outcome.
Okay, and Israel has denied striking on Tuesday a humanitarian area in a town near Rafah. What do we know about this?
Well, as part of the Israeli military plan in Rafah, one of the major things that Israel is constantly doing is to evacuate the civilians from the area of Rafah. There has been different areas of safe zones for Palestinians in Rafah. One of them is a place called Mawasi. It is an area that actually has been allocated for a long period of time since the beginning of the war, and it's located west of Rafah in the vicinity of the shore. But we have to remember that in the end of the day, this is a war that takes place with Hamas, who is taking shelter of its own brothers and sisters and deliberately, knowingly operating from massively populated areas. So obviously that increases the challenges of such a war, which to start with is of course very challenging.
Yeah, definitely very challenging. And with the UN's International Court of Justice ordering Israel to halt its operation in Rafah, and with all this negative news coverage mounting that we're hearing about, how could Israel's ground operations in Rafah be impacted?
Well, look, the Israeli government sends a very clear message, basically saying, look, this war could end tomorrow morning if Hamas is going to release the hostages. And this is, by the way, one of the major demands that was done by the international community, including the ICJ. I want to remind us all that was a clear demand to immediately, without condition, to release all the hostages. So the equation here in the end of the day is quite clear. The issue is that we all understand that Hamas has no interest to release the hostages. Hamas is trying to exhaust this card to the best possibility that he can. And unfortunately, he get a backwind by support of some Western circles who fail to understand the essence of the situation or pretend to fail to understand the essence of the situation.
Okay, and the U.S. has signaled Israel's strike on Sunday did not cross a red line, but that a major ground invasion would. They're saying, we still don't want to see the Israelis smash into Rafah with large units over large pieces of territory, unquote. Is moving large units into Rafah necessary for Israel to achieve its goals there?
I don't know to say what the terms large exactly means and what's the scale and volume of such an operation. To the best of my understanding, the Israeli military plan, according at least regarding Rafah, is not necessarily based upon a massive use of massive military power. Not necessarily. It could be done through different methods of like much more pinpoint operations on the ground, gradually advancing based upon an intelligence that is gathered through the operation and basically translated immediately to an operational mode on the ground itself. So I don't know to say exactly what does it mean, large or huge proportion or power, using of power. I would say that in the end of the day, it seems to me like that there is a kind of like silent understanding between the US and Israel. What are the, I would say, the field lines that the US will tolerate an Israeli military operation in the Rafah area? And I think that Israel basically tunes to that.
And yet the United States has talked about this red line. What can you tell us about, what do we know about this red line they've set out?
Well, reportedly, I mean, the major concern of the Biden administration is the whole issue of the humanitarian crisis and, of course, the concern about the Palestinians who are not combatant, who are not involved in the fight. This is something that is shared also, of course, by Israel. There is an enormous effort to try to minimize as much as possible collateral damage. As I said before, the major challenge is that first, Hamas is using his own brothers and sisters deliberately and knowingly as a human shield. And second, the fight is taking place in areas where sometimes one place is becoming a battle stage between Hamas militants and Israeli soldiers, and a couple of yards away from there are markets with people. There are streets where people are staying in that are basically have nothing to do with the fight. So we can all understand that in the end of the day, trying to define those red lines and understanding the nature of this dynamic on the ground is very challenging in every possible perspective. I think that in the end of the day, there is an attempt of the Biden administration in Israel to come to an agreement, sort of speaking, about what will be the agreed field lines that will enable, and Israel will be permitted, sort of speaking, by the United States to continue its operation in Rafah. I think that the common denominator is that both Israel and the Biden administration, but President Biden himself was very clear about it since the beginning of the war, that Hamas rules must come to an end. Hamas rule must come to an end, and one of the major ways to do that is to crush Hamas military spine. This is one aspect of the whole issue. The other one is, of course, to do with what's called the arrangements of the day post Hamas, which obviously has to do with the more political and diplomatic aspects of this situation.
So what is next in Israel's move on Hamas and Rafah here?
Well, according to the Israeli Prime Minister's statement and the other officials, Israel is determined to deal with the remaining major power of Hamas, apparently talking about some 4 battalions of Hamas out of 24 battalions before the war. Those 4 battalions reportedly are mostly located in the area of Rafah. It's possible that some of them basically are disguised as civilians trying to move out from the area of Rafah and basically to relocate themselves in other areas of Gaza and then to relaunch attacks. But to the best of my understanding and based upon the Israeli Prime Minister statements, Israel is determined to operate in Rafah in order to complete that part of the mission, meaning crushing Hamas military spine. I don't think that it will be reasonable or realistic to expect that Hamas is going to be totally erased. This is not realistic, but I think that in the end of the day, the whole major objective here is, in the end of this whole phase, to limit as much as possible Hamas' ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda, which is also the Iranian regime radical agenda. Hamas has been doing that, unfortunately, quite successfully for the last 40 years. So there is a need to limit Hamas' ability to continue and to do that, because otherwise the meaning of that is that both Israeli and Palestinians will have no future.
All right. Avi Melamed, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.